The weather today will be cloudy and warm. The cafeteria has a delicious lunch planned for today. They are serving pork, rib on bun, baked beans, corn, peach cup. This sounds delicious. Now to today's news.
Good morning, Eagles. Don't forget to wear your Hewlett Speedwear on Wednesdays and Fridays. There's no school this Wednesday for teacher training. Now over to you for more news.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Eagles. September is Deaf Awareness Month. This is a time to celebrate the history of the deaf community and to push for rights for deaf people everywhere. Let's watch this short video on how sign language, the official language for hearing impaired individuals, was created.
The story of American Sign Language. The roots of American Sign Language, or ASL, go back hundreds of years, to a time before America was even a nation, to a tiny island off the coast of Massachusetts called Martha's Vineyard. Some of the colonists from England who settled there at the end of the 17th century were deaf and carried a gene for deafness. By the mid-19th century, there was a large deaf population on the island, and they all spoke sign language. It had developed organically through natural socializing, and most of the hearing people there spoke it too. It isn't there anymore. The deaf Martha's Vineyard residents started to leave the island in the 1800s to attend the first American School for the Deaf, established in Hartford, Connecticut in 1817 by Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. Gallaudet was a preacher who began to research methods for educating the deaf after meeting his neighbor's deaf child. He traveled to England to observe a method of training for speech and lip reading, but the developers of that system were protective and unwilling to give away their secrets and turned him away. So he went to France, where he was welcomed to the School for the Deaf in Paris, which used sign as a method of instruction. He convinced Laurent Clerc, a deaf teacher and graduate of the Paris Deaf School, to accompany him back to Hartford, where they founded the American School for the Deaf. The school began with a mixture of sign systems. There were many students who used the Martha's Vineyard sign, and they came together with deaf students from around New England, some of whom had rudimentary gesture systems only used in the home, and some with more developed systems that were used in towns with other deaf people. In school, they were exposed to each other, to Parisian Sign Language, and to a method for visually representing some aspects of English. And ASL was born out of the mix. Today, ASL is much closer to French Sign Language than it is to British Sign Language, which has no historical connection to ASL. Over the course of the 19th century, deaf schools opened all over the U.S., and many graduates of the Hartford School took their signing with them to careers as teachers and principals across the country. ASL became the language of the American deaf, deepening and expanding over generations of use. That process hit a roadblock in the 1880s when proponents of oral education, including Alexander Graham Bell, convinced many schools to discourage sign language in favor of speech training. Suddenly, students were forbidden from signing, punished by having their hands tied behind their backs. They spent hours learning to mimic mouth shapes to produce vowels and consonants, hours they had once spent learning math, history, and literature. But ASL lived on in the shadows and under the tables. It wasn't until a century later that attitudes toward ASL began to change back. Research began to show the benefit of having a full, easily acquired language as early as possible, and the harm of not having one, which happened to many deaf kids who could never manage to acquire speech. Deaf people became politically empowered and advocated for giving ASL the respect it deserved and had earned through more than 2 centuries of American history.
Here are a few things you should know about deaf and hard of hearing people. Number 1, if someone doesn't respond to you, they probably cannot hear you. They are not being rude or ignoring you, they simply did not hear you. 2, some deaf individuals do not identify as deaf, they might prefer to be called hard of hearing. 3, every deaf person has their own preferred communication or language. Some may choose to use sign language sign language or use both at the same time. Some might prefer to use only one or neither one. They choose the method that works best for them. Tomorrow we will take a look at some more things to know about deaf and hard of hearing individuals. The more we know, the better we will understand. Now to Dr. Carr for Marvelous Monday.
Good morning, Eagle family. As you know, this month's character trait is perseverance. Perseverance is persistence to do something despite difficulties or obstacles. Perseverance means no matter how many times you fail, you will keep trying. Someone has perseverance when they keep practicing until they learn something. Last week, we started watching a video about perseverance and the dip. Remember, the dip is when it gets really challenging and it can be really, really hard to have perseverance and keep trying. Today, we are going to watch the second part of the 3-part video.
Chapter 2. Will Katie escape the dip? Last time, Katie learned about the dip, the struggle that everyone goes through, even geniuses like Mojomus Edison. Katie couldn't wait to tell her friends about the dip. "Whoa, that's a totally rad idea, Katie," said Bruce. "But how does one get out of this dip?" "I'll find out right after lunch," said Katie. "I just have to read the rest of the book." After lunch, Katie couldn't wait to find the book and get out of the dip. She bolted to the library, only to find the book was gone. And Katie was crestfallen. The next day, Katie kept painting, but her heart wasn't in it. "Yo, Katie! Are you out of the dip yet?" said Bruce. "Oh, totally," said Katie. But the truth was that without the book, Katie had no idea how to get out of the dip. Suddenly, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. She couldn't believe it. It looked just like the dip. "What do you think of my painting, Katie?" It was Miss Clara. "You know about the dip?" said Katie. "Miss Clara, you have to tell me how to get out of the dip before the big show." "Oh," said Miss Clara. "Well, let's see what we can learn by watching Mojo." "I'm not so sure about that," said Katie. "I don't know if you've seen Mojo's work, but he's not exactly Vincent van... Whoa. Wow. It's so much better. How did he do that?" "You tell me," said Miss Clara. "Watch." Katie watched Mojo closely. "I've never seen him so focused," she said. "Oh, he's just made a mistake," said Miss Clara. "Watch what he does now." "What was that?" said Katie. "That," said Miss Clara, "was Mojo's neurons getting much stronger. All because he stopped to reflect on his mistake." "Oh," said Katie. "Wait, what do you mean he stopped to reflect?" "To reflect," said Miss Clara, "is just to look at your work and think really hard about how to make it better. Mojo reflects all the time. That's what gets him out of the dip." "Wait, that's how you get out of the dip? It seems so simple." "It is simple," agreed Miss Clara. "But that doesn't mean it's not powerful. If you reflect often enough, the results may just surprise you." Katie still couldn't believe how much Mojo had improved. But she wondered, Could she escape the dip by reflecting like Mojo? That was an interesting question indeed.
So we learned that to have perseverance and escape the dip, we have to reflect. As we saw in the video, to reflect, we just stop and think really hard about what we're trying to do. We will watch the final part of the video series next Monday and see if Katie can reflect and escape the dip too. For Marvelous Monday, this is Dr. Carr. Make it a great day. The choice is yours. Now to the joke of the day.
Thank you so much. Today's joke brought by a student in Dr. Edwards' 3rd grade class. Are you ready to laugh? Why does the math book look so unhappy?
I don't know.
Because it's full of problems. Thank you for sharing this joke with us. We really enjoyed it. Now to the hero's purpose.
As
Heroes, our heads solve problems and are always learning. Our hearts are respectful and considerate, and our hands work together for the good of all. Make it an excellent